I'm here with Dr. Sarah Washington O'Neill Rush, the great granddaughter of Booker T. Washington. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, doing
That's really
well.
that's really amazing. I'm a history major, and I always loved the legacy of like Booker T. Washington. How much pride does that give you being his granddaughter?
Yeah, so lots, I should say, a lot of I feel a lot of I guess you would say I'm inspired and it's a privilege, a blessing. It's rare, and I don't know how much of my story that you already know, but it didn't I didn't really know of his work, how incredible it was until my young adult years. So while I grew up knowing that he was my great grandfather, I really didn't know what all that meant. And then we gave a family reunion, a Booker T. Washington family reunion, our first one on the campus at Tuskegee University. And that's where it all became clear, everything that he did, George Washington Carver, and a lot of other significant African American former slaves. And I was very inspired. So that's when it came to life for me.
Wow, that sounds like, an amazing experience. And he was like the first president of Tuskegee, correct?
Yes, he opened it in 1881, July 4th, as a matter of fact, July 4th, 1881. He opened the doors of Tuskegee Institute at the time, and it was to educate former slaves and their children. And so he started there. And yeah, he's the first president. And until recently, there were only, I think there were only four presidents. And in the last several years, there's been probably three or four more. So it's gone to seven or eight presidents.
Wow. That's so
Yeah.
incredible. I'm really not surprised that you have a your fourth book, Blueprint to Excellence, Being Growing, Leading, Soaring. Can you talk about like what inspired you to write that book?
So it's been in the works for about 8 years. I was going to call it 16 Success Principles. And 16 is a significant number for me because, not knowing who my great grandfather was at 16, I, it's a long story, so I won't go into that unless we lead there. But it's at the age of 16, some significant things happened. And then I found out that I'm the 16th great grandchild. So I'm the last born of the great grandchildren of Booker T. Washington. And so I came up with 16 success principles. And again, under the being, growing, leading, and soaring, under each one of those quadrants are four of the success principles, and they build off of one another. And I believe you asked me what inspired me to write it is everything I write or everything I do deals more with the person and not what's on the outside of the person. And it's to follow in the footsteps of my great grandfather, to carry on his legacy of improving lives of people, because he had one quote, and it said, um, it's I wish I could quote it exactly, and I probably could. I should have gotten it. Oh, it's important and right for all privileges of law to be ours, but it is vastly more important for the preparation of those rights and privileges. So, in other words, if we're not prepared internally to exercise our rights and privileges, what good really is it? And so, in a lot of things, the only things we can control is ourselves, or that's what we have immediate control over. And then we can tackle those bigger problems that we may be faced with after we tackle our internal problems. So that's what inspired me. I'm just all about professional development, personal development, self-improvement, in order for you to go out and whatever your passion is or your purpose is, you're more prepared to handle it.
One of your previous books includes Rising Up from Blood, A Legacy
Yeah.
Reclaimed. Can you talk about that book?
Yeah. So I wrote that book because, and I can't remember when it was published, but I wrote that because my life changed dramatically after that family reunion on the grounds of Tuskegee University. And so I guess now I can go into kind of so what that book is about is my experience of growing up with my dad leaving when I was 11, trying to find himself, and he moved away. And so I didn't see him again until I was a young adult. And he used to, like, my mom is the granddaughter. She's buried there now on the campus of Tuskegee University. And she was born and raised across the street in a home that he built. And I'm kind of going off into a tangent, but I'll bring it back. But it was a home that he built, or no, that he gave to her parents as a wedding present. Her father was the youngest son of Booker T. Washington, and he was Ernest Davidson Washington. And so she didn't talk about it much. She moved to California. She came to California to christen a ship being named after Booker T. Washington, a USS Liberty ship. And that's where she met my dad. And then she stayed, and she was in her 20s at the time. She stayed in California. They got married, and they got married twice, and my brother and I were products of their second marriage. But when we were coming along, that's around the time the Black Panthers in the 60s, the Black Panthers, they lived a stone's throw away from us. And there was, and my mom just didn't talk about her relationship to Booker T. Washington a lot. We lived in North Oakland. And my dad, though, he was really proud of the relationship, but he never told us what, why are you so proud? But he would introduce us to everybody as the great grandchildren of Booker T. Washington. And then when he left, I never heard that anymore. I never learned about what all. There was like a blurb in the textbooks. I went to school in Oakland, Northern California, and that he started Tuskegee Institute, but I still didn't know what all that meant, what it took to do it. And then when I went to the university, and everybody, they were there to welcome our family because people didn't realize that direct descendants were still living, and they were excited. There were students and faculty and reporters and all kinds of people. And my mom was alive at the time. And I'm like, Mama, what is this? Why are all these people here? And we went to the Carver Museum, George Washington Carver Museum, and learned all about everything that he did there on campus. And then the thing I was most inspired by, and I talk about when I go out and speak a lot, I talk about the bricks that the students made these bricks to erect buildings for them to live and learn in, and they made them. And so I was just so inspired because these were former slaves. And then a lot of times, sometimes my great grandfather gets a bad rap. They call him a sellout, or Uncle Tom, this, that he just wanted his students to be slaves. But in order for them to erect those buildings, they had to know engineering, they had to know mathematics, they had to know how to read, they had to know how to develop plans. And this is all that he was teaching them. So when I went back home, my life went from being an at risk youth, at my dad gone, my mother gone, acting up, looking for myself in all the wrong places, to saying, wow, if they did that as former slaves, there's no excuse. And so I just went to really reading about him and all he'd done, and learning about my family. And so I just started the 16 Success Principles as a result of that. And the name just changed just this year, just before it was published, to Blueprint to Excellence.
For sure. You
Yeah.
know, what are your plans now? Like, you've released 4 books. I see also that you've appeared on print and been in television and radio documentaries. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. Well, people, when they find out, because what I did, I love to write. That's my passion. I always loved to write. So I started out writing a newsletter. And I have a background also. I have a degree in mental health and psychology. So I became I was doing psychotherapy for a little bit. So I started writing a newsletter after I came back, after I read Up from Slavery on mental health and coupled with African American history. And then people started asking me to speak. And I never thought about speaking before, but they didn't know my relationship to Booker T. Washington until, I started writing this newsletter. So now today, I speak when people ask me, I'll tailor my message to fit whatever the theme of their event is. But to answer your questions about my plans are always to kind of touch on that, I share my story with them. I go into depth about what happened with me as an at-risk youth, but to bring it back to us and how we can grow and improve and lead excellent lives on the way. So my plans, I guess, are to do more speaking as those things come about. To hopefully, an online course is something I want to develop, or I'm actually in the throes of developing an online course that goes with the book, and that should be available probably in the summer. But I've done some teaching, and so just to be available to encourage, inspire, and help people with professional development, personal development, any way I can.
Most definitely. You mentioned like, the at-risk youth and, being
Mhm.
16, like what actually like, was the experience?
Yeah. So after my dad left, he moved away, and I'm again looking for myself in all the wrong places. And I actually, at the age of 16, I became a mom, a single teenage mom, ended up on welfare. I was living by myself at the age of 17, and I come from this family who there are more people. I'm in the fourth generation. So there's Booker T. Washington, then there's my grandfather, then my mother, and then my generation. And so out of those four generations, there are way more people that um, they have advanced degrees, right? And so I come from this family of educated people, my mom and her three sisters grew up sort of like royalty, right across. My mom was born in 1919. He died in 1915. They grew up, in fact, their home is right next door to Lionel Richie's grandmother, and that's where he grew up in Tuskegee, Alabama. And so that house is still there, his grandmother's house, and he preserves it. It's beautiful, well kept. But my mom's house was destroyed. But and remind me of your question because I'm going off on a tangent again. I just have so much information and I get so excited about this subject, but
Yeah.
bring me back.
Well, like, that's amazing. Like, what do you think
Oh,
would be your advice for, young girls who find themselves in that situation of being like, a teen mom or
yeah. Yeah. Well, what I was gonna say is you reminded me too. So at 16, I become a mom, and my mom, they grew up like royalty. And so it was really an embarrassment to the family. But I am an open book now, and I believe in telling my story because I wouldn't advise any teenager to have a child. It was rough, and it was rough well into my adult years because, he grew up without a dad, right? And so, and he kind of grew up with me. And so that was really rough. But I did the best that I could. And then I kept education was so important to me. So, because that's the one thing my parents agreed on was to get your education, both my mother and father, get your education. So I finished high school, living on my own in drug riddled, crime ridden projects, but I finished high school. So if I were to give advice, it would be to keep on doing your best, to never give up on yourself and learn to appreciate and love yourself before you go out and try to change somebody to love you. A lot of times when we are getting in trouble, oftentimes it has to do without a dad being in the home. And so we look for our dad in places, the wrong places. And so I would say work on you first, get your life together. So if you have a child, you're going to have to do the best and be the best role model you can be for that child. And if that child, especially if he's a boy, which I had a boy, to find positive male role models if the dad is not in the picture, to be there for the boy. But even for girls, they need to see those positive male role models as well.
72% of, black babies are born to like unmarried mothers. That was like a statistic in like 2011. What can be done, like, to solve that problem in our community?
Yeah, I think it would be hard to, well, of course, it'd be hard to solve it completely, but we can attack it, begin to attack it or to address it. And then that's another place where I just think you we can blame other people, we can blame structures or systems. We've been doing that, right? But things don't change as rapidly as they would if we look inside ourselves and see, what part did we play in this and what can we change? Um, and that's what, and for some reason, it feels like for me that God keeps putting in my pathway or in my sight, in my family, in my personal life, in my circles, I keep seeing parts that we play. And that's the part that if we need to address that part, and then we can more effectively address anything else that's outside of ourselves. But we can't let go of that part that maybe we did play. There's some things that we can do to change. 'Cause I don't know if that makes sense or answers your question.
Yeah, it most definitely does. Like, do what is your higher power, like, spiritual belief? You seem like, that you believe in a higher power. Uh
Yeah. So I'm a Christian. I follow Jesus. I'm a Christian. A lot of things that I do believe in, they align with that. They align with the Bible. Um, yeah.
Most definitely, like, I love Jesus too. Like, Dr. Sarah Washington O'Neill Rush, thank you so much for taking the time. I really appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate you. Yeah.